if you're going to scale a company or you're going to lead a company, you have to keep learning and growing. And what got you to one point isn't going to get you to the next. And it's kind of like survival of the fittest. Startups in particular are survival of the fittest. And those people who, whether we're talking about product market fit or operating efficiently and effectively at scale, adaptability is really the key. You got to be open to input. You have to listen. You have to be willing to hear resistance and not just bulldoze through it. You have to learn to get people's buy-in. All of that boils down to your ability to change your behavior and adjust as you get feedback from your customers, from the market, from the economy, from whatever is impacting your business.
Welcome to the Tyler Dickerhoof Show with me, your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I am joined by Rich Hagberg. Rich is the author of Founders Keepers. If you're watching the video, you can see it right over his left shoulder behind him. As well, he started HCG Inc., a leadership company, which he sold almost 20 years ago now to Accenture. He's been doing a lot of research pre and post that, continues to consult with CEOs throughout the world. Rich, so good to be here with you, man.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So we and I had an opportunity to talk a few weeks ago, kind of get to know each other, and ended up having a phenomenal conversation that we probably should have recorded as a podcast in and of itself. But one of the things that, left me from that conversation and thinking about is if leadership could be reduced to one brutal truth, what's the one reason great founders fail?
The research that we did on 122 founders, where we had personality data and 360 rating data from their colleagues, boiled down to a number of variables, but the single greatest thing that impacts leadership behavior is adaptability. If you're going to scale a company or you're going to lead a company, you have to keep learning and growing. And what got you to one point isn't going to get you to the next. And it's kind of like survival of the fittest. Startups in particular are survival of the fittest. And those people who, whether we're talking about product market fit or operating efficiently and effectively at scale, adaptability is really the key. You got to be open to input. You have to listen. You have to be willing to hear resistance and not just bulldoze through it. You have to learn to get people's buy-in. All of that boils down to your ability to change your behavior and adjust as you get feedback from your customers, from the market, from the economy, from whatever is impacting your business. You have to be adaptable.
I'm going to guess, based upon what you've worked through, though, is I don't want to say that's a spectrum, but that isn't just I'm super adaptable. It is understanding, when do I give, when do I hold, firm. It really takes a lot of learning, I'm guessing.
Yeah. That's really a good way to say it. You have to let the facts win rather than let your ego win. You have to adjust to the realities of the situation, right?
Well, I mean,
in business and in life, reality is going to be the winner. So your job is to get in touch with it.
Sometimes the reality is, I'm a football fan. I don't know if we got into that. I mean, you're down in, Pullman for a little bit. I mean, they had a football team at one point. It was pretty good. But one of the things that this time of year, that new year, we just got through the football season. You see all these coaches that get fired. I mean, coaches that have, sometimes long tenures, no different corporations kind of, there's a seasonal change a lot of times, whether it's the end of their fiscal year, quarterly, whatever. You see that. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of football coaches, CEOs, get fired is there were sacred cows, meaning, oh, yeah, we need to change, but we can't change that. I mean, that's just part of who we are. Man, they've been here so long. They did so much good for us. We can change everything but that. I think that's got to be a major Achilles heel in this conversation of adaptability.
I think it's different for bigger companies and early stage companies. In early stage companies, what they have to realize is that what got them here in the early scrappy days, the things that worked well when there were only 7 of you in the room or 17 of you in the room, aren't going to work when there are 100 or 200 or 1,000. Like culture, the informal culture in an early stage company is like, a bunch of people sitting in one room, communicating easily with each other, don't have to define roles. Everybody's doing whatever needs to be done. But as time goes on, you have to start defining roles and putting in place structure because you're dealing with more and more complexity.
Yeah.
And more demands on you from your customers and from your employees. And in larger companies, and I've coached a Fortune 20 CEO, and his biggest dilemma was that he had inherited a company that had fallen in love with what made them successful in the earliest 40 years. And all of a sudden, aggressive competitors were eating their lunch. And they had this huge infrastructure and they had this way of doing things that were institutionalized. The culture had become embedded and it wasn't nimble. And the more nimble the competitors, the more they fell behind. So it's different. Like in the beginning, you're adding structure, you're adding focus, you're trying to adjust to feedback in order to find product market fit. But it's never over. You never have permanent product market fit. And if you're a $5 billion company and all of a sudden you're this big, slow moving beast, you're not going to succeed. So the adaptability takes different forms. But for instance, what we found was looking at the unsuccessful founders, and unsuccessful and successful in our research was based on multiple of invested capital. How much money are you making for the investors? And so the successful ones were defined as those who got a 10x return on the initial investment. The unsuccessful ones were the ones who got nothing and went out of business. The unsuccessful ones were stubborn and defensive and resistant to feedback, and they wanted to be right rather than getting to the right answer. And that killed them. And it's not that the successful, founders as a group are strong-willed, persistent, insistent, demanding bunch of people. But the successful ones had learned to modify their aggressiveness and make better, more disciplined decisions, be more diplomatic, be more reflective. There's an interesting item on the personality test that was one of the biggest differentiators between successful and unsuccessful. There's an item that says, I frequently reflect upon my past successes and failures. And to my surprise, the successful ones modestly agreed with that. But the unsuccessful ones disagreed. They didn't reflect this. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, I'm right. Right? And that really comes down to a learning attitude. You have to recognize that you've got a lot to learn, and the lessons of the stage you're at are probably not going to apply completely or perfectly to the next stage. So every stage of your growth requires an adjustment in your leadership. And if you're not learning and growing and green all along the way, you're going to fall behind. And the majority of unsuccessful founders get taken out because they haven't learned the lessons, particularly around execution.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 1986, we did some statistical analysis of our first 360, and we've continued to do that work. And it showed up 3 different styles of leadership. I call that the visionary evangelist. Think Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, inspirational visionaries who are strong-willed and, passionate. And then there's the relationship builders. Those are the ones who build good teams, get buy-in. They cultivate the relationships and learn to work through others effectively. And then there's the managers of execution, the people who make the trains run on time, organized, structured, disciplined. The typical founder is a high visionary, medium relationship, and low execution. The successful ones are high visionary, a little above the mean on a relationship, not great, modestly low execution. But the unsuccessful ones were abysmal on relationship and abysmal on execution. But all of them need to work on execution. And what that means is you got to bring in people, either the people who report to you in the function as function heads, or as a COO, who bring that execution discipline. Because as you get more complex, that's going to get in the way. It's going to kill you.
Yeah. Do you find that piece, as you've gone through that, as you've done the assessments, the ones that are quicker to recognize, man, I'm the bottleneck. I'll share that with people, that I realize that if I'm the bottleneck, that's a good thing, because I can control that if I know it. If I don't think I'm the bottleneck, then dude, we're all doomed. And so kind of to this question, if those people recognize they're the bottleneck, that execution factor, there's probably got to be a win.
Absolutely. The successful, both the best leaders and the successful founders, had learned to let go of control and work through others. There are times when you have to jump in and take charge, but if you hover over people and micromanage, you'll drive them crazy, you'll drive them out, and you'll become a bottleneck because you can't make all the decisions. You'll also burn out because there are 19 people at your door every day waiting for you to give them the decision. And you haven't empowered them. And so you're making stupid, small decisions that you ought to delegate to somebody. Right?
When that's going on, what's the first sign that the leader has not embraced, I'm low on execution? Is it through the business failing, or is it people are like, dude, I can't work with you?
I think the way it shows up is as the business gets more complex, it gets more chaotic. You make more mistakes. You make decisions on the fly that come back to bite you. Some good people leave because they didn't want to be micromanaged, or you want to hire somebody who is senior and they did their homework on the company and they realized that you were the roadblock to success. And they didn't want to sign up for that. They were used to being empowered and having a certain amount of autonomy. I think another early sign is that you're burning out. I had a Post-it on my mirror for 5 years. I kept having to replace it as the room steamed up. And it said, what's the best and highest use of your time today? And as you're growing, the answer to that question keeps changing. And you ought to keep focusing on the things that are more strategic. That doesn't mean that on occasion when there's a crisis, you don't dive in to the details. But you only have so much bandwidth. Another sign would be you have too many direct reports.
Mm.
Right. And you're trying to have your hands in everything. I mean, there are founders who I've worked with who are proud that they had 20 direct reports. I mean, that didn't scale, man.
It's almost like a badge of honor. I'm so good, I can handle all this. Like,
yeah,
it almost begs this conversation. I think as we're talking about organizations and founders, and at what point do you pass things off, right? That's got to be a part of you start up, you pass things off. And I think this badge of honor, like I can do it all, I don't have to pass it off. That's just going to lead to your failure.
You're right. And when people say things like they don't know where the company is going, that tells you haven't provided enough clarity of high level direction. Or the same things keep breaking and you find yourself firefighting all the time. That says that you haven't found repeatable processes to take care of things that ought to become routine playbooks. There are all sorts of, I mean, it's very interesting. I will have calls from people who want to work with me, and I start asking them what the challenges they're facing are. And it's a repeating pattern. If they say, well, I'm getting burned out, or I'm having trouble holding people accountable, but they think that means yelling at somebody, and doesn't mean clarifying what you expect. My team is letting me down. What does that say about you being the parent and them, you seeing them as children? It's hub and spoke. When it gets to be too hub and spoke and all the spokes have to come to you for all the decisions, all kinds of things break.
Yeah. When we spoke last time, I shared with you kind of my 4 walls, the 4 wall, the barriers, the intensity, isolation, insensitivity, and activity. And I, as we're talking about this, whether it's the execution, whether it's the visionary, whether it's the relationships, and as you describe these, kind of like that, the person that comes to you and say, Rich, I need help. It's, right. As you and I had kind of talked about, to me, that's these walls that have just been so ingrained, right, that someone's not able to see them. And the reality is they got to start seeing, whether it's like through 360, seeing what other people see, feedback. So they can understand.
Self-awareness is important. So run them by me again. I know the first one is intensity.
Yes, sir.
Founders as a group, all of them are intense. They're determined. They're persistent. They just keep hitting the wall and hitting the wall and hitting the wall. And those who don't have a mission and don't want to have an impact, they'll hit the wall a few times and give up. Mm-hmm. So, but on the other hand, that intensity can get in the way because you can overwhelm people and intimidate people and they won't push back. And sometimes you have to moderate your intensity and serve as a facilitator rather than somebody who's powering through every single situation. So that's the first one. But I mean, you are the inspirational role model. And so you've got to be showing people you're committed. But too many of them would use that intensity thing as permission to keep engaging in bad behavior, which is intimidating, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of like what you said is what got me here. Oh, my intensity, my drive, my push. I can work super hard. It's like, well, pretty soon that burns you and them out.
Yeah.
And people are like, I don't know how much longer I can deal with this. Yeah. And so then I see the flip side of that is when, you have this intensity and then all of a sudden you're like, maybe you have a self-awareness situation where people then start to isolate. And that's the next one is like, all right, fine. If I'm too much, I'm just going to completely check out.
Yeah, okay. So the isolation is an interesting thing because I would actually put it differently first.
Okay.
Founders as a group, people who become entrepreneurs, are loners by mentality. And founders as a group get very low ratings on 360 things like organizational awareness. That loner tendency gets in the way in terms of decision making too.
Mm-hmm.
They try to make too many decisions themselves. They go off on the mountain, they talk to God, they come down with the tablets, and they tell people, well, that won't get you there when it's a very complex company and you have a lot of competitors and lots of market dynamics and lots of functions.
Or if there's not good relationships. I mean, if all of a sudden, say you and I, and like, all right, Rich, I had this idea and you trust me. And like, Tyler, every time it's been said, I don't even need to question. Yeah, we're going to go with it, or vice versa. That relationship building can allow for some of that, come down from the mountain. Yeah. But if you're like, I'm just firing in every day, and all of a sudden one day we're going this way, and then, nope, we're going that way. It's like, no, dude, I'm not with you.
Right. The other way you brought up isolation, however, was that employees start pulling back.
Yeah.
And that's usually a sign that their morale is down because they're feeling disempowered, or your behavior is abusive, or something has caused them to pull in, and you start to lose them. Yeah. And I was actually writing something on employee loyalty this morning. And one of the things that's a sign that you're losing people is they start just focusing on themselves and pulling back from the company. Their commitment starts to break. So dangerous.
Yeah.
What's your third wall?
So then insensitivity, meaning.
I get it.
Go ahead.
Insensitivity. As a group, founders and CEOs in general are focused on getting things done, and they're focused on their own agenda. There's an element of narcissism in all leaders. The unsuccessful ones are more malignant narcissists. They're more really dysfunctional. But I think when you're focused on solving the business problems and not aware of your impact on other people, and it's usually that they become unaware that people are afraid of them, or they don't see them as approachable, or you hurt somebody and they quit. That's a sign that you're not aware of your own impact. And one of the things that was true of the successful founders, although they weren't Mother Teresa, they were way more aware of their own behavior, and they monitored it. They were more reflective about their own behavior. And you can see in their profile that they have all the tendencies of being impatient and aggressive and goal-driven workaholics. But they've recognized the downside of that. And they use things like employee surveys, whether it's engagement or 360 or whatever, to get feedback, so they recognize how they impact people. What was the next wall?
Inactivity. And this one, kind of is like almost a fear base of like, ooh, if I do something, I don't want to have to deal with the result.
I think there's a study done about 30 years ago that I can't remember the total number, but of all CEOs, 64% of them had imposter syndrome. They felt like one of these days somebody's going to figure out they didn't really know what the hell was going on and that they were an imposter. I'd say an early stage company, most of them are imposters. They're learning on the job. Those who are objective realize that. The less successful ones are driven by fear of failure and of making mistakes. And one of the things that causes them to micromanage is that they're afraid that a mistake will be made if they don't, oversee all decisions.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I think recognizing your limitations is something we all have to learn. We all have to figure out what's our secret sauce and what are we good at, and what are the things that are going to limit us. Because if we don't know that, we won't see where we might make a mistake or where we could fail. One of the things that is true about best leaders and successful founders is they make better decisions. They make better decisions because they're not overly optimistic or overly confident. Because when you're overly optimistic or overly confident, you don't recognize what assumptions you've made that may no longer be true, or that you really lack the awareness and the knowledge of something that's going to be required for this decision. And you just keep pushing to be right rather than recognizing the limits of what you know.
Is that challenge to be vulnerable? You know, like going back to the lack of adaptability. If you're willing to be adaptable and you're willing to be vulnerable, like you were just talking about there, I mean, you walk into an office and you have that conversation with a leader who seems like they're willing to say, I don't know, Rich, maybe I need to grow or whatever. That's probably got to give you a lot of excitement, as opposed to, Rich, you got to fix my people because I got it all figured out.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, it happened to be in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
About 6 years ago, I coached a guy who, the company was still very small. I can't remember how many people, but less than 50, maybe less than 20. And he got this 360 that said he walked on water. And about halfway through our coaching assignment, he says, I don't think I need you anymore. I think I got it figured out. Came back to me recently and said, I don't have it figured out anymore. I need to start over. And he got humbled by his new 360. The company is now pretty good size. And he recognized that some of the things that he was doing were preventing the company from being successful. And he was burning out. And people were seeing him as intimidating and not willing to listen. And he was very surprised. He was humbled. I mean, if I could have had a picture of the last session I had with him 6 years ago and the session that I had this time where we were going over his feedback, he was open to hearing the news and was interested in trying to understand it. And he was humbled in the best way. I'm looking forward to working with him now.
Well, as you're saying that, and you talk about the pictures. There is so much an element where you can read a person's authenticity, their vulnerability, their adaptability.
Yeah, you can.
Just sitting like you and I are.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have to learn how to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, if any of my former employees from 25 or so years ago would listen to this, they would laugh. Because there were a whole series of incidents that really brought it home to me. Let me give you one. We hired a newly minted MBA and we gave her some sort of customer initiative to take as her first assignment. And we had a staff meeting and we had a big conference table and about 20 people could sit around it. And she was reporting out what she concluded. And I said something diplomatic like, well, that sounds like bribery to me. And my most seasoned consultant leans across the table, puts his glasses on the end of his nose and leans over and says, now, Rich, is that a decision? And I said, okay, I got it. What did you guys hear? And my COO, who was also sitting on the other side of the table, came up with an absolutely brilliant idea. I mean, really brilliant. He says, well, look, I see what she was trying to do. you're right. The approach was not maybe the best approach, but what if we did this? And that started a discussion that iterated around the table a while. And then he actually came up with the last idea, which had built upon the other ideas. So that one really got to me. All right. Another one was I came up with a new product idea to create a culture assessment tool, which ultimately was the asset that Accenture bought my company to get. But I hadn't thought through all of that idea. I hadn't thought through the implications. And so I brought it to my team, particularly the same guy, by the way. His name is Bob, if he's listening. And there was another meeting that we had down the line that built on this, where he questioned, he said, well, creating a snapshot of a corporate culture as it is today is like giving a person a personality test, but not giving them any solutions. But in order to figure out what you need to change, you have to figure out what's going to support your strategy. I mean, if you're a company that is in a heavily regulated industry, you have to have a lot of disciplines and a lot of checks and balances. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to create a state-of-the-art product that you're going to charge more for because people want to be state-of-the-art, then that's a whole different culture. So we need to have a strategy before and a desired culture that will support that strategy before we can decide what element of the culture needs to change. And so we had to iterate the original idea. I would never have gotten to that. But then we found out that people, when we tried to get them to clarify the strategy at the executive team level, they weren't in agreement. So we needed a whole process for getting in another tool to get them to clarify the strategy. So that original idea, if I'd have just gone with that, would have flamed out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I had to figure, my optimism was there. I was motivating people. My creative idea came up with something, but we needed to build on that. And that takes being willing to listen to input and question some of your own assumptions and admitting that you didn't have all the answers.
Well, it takes that humility, the vulnerability, right? The adaptability. And it goes back to, our previous conversation when you and I were just chatting a few weeks ago. And this idea, which you shared with me, is that some leaders just don't have the capacity or, quote unquote, I will say in this case, the motivation to grow. Yeah. You just shared a couple stories where you had to go through that. And it's kind of like, you mentioned the CEO that came to you, that he was forced to grow. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I'm looking for the teacher because the student's ready. It's like,
that's right.
How do you, as you're leading, how do you either foster that, hey, the desire to grow? Because I believe everyone has the capacity, but I know everyone doesn't have the motivation. And that motivation over time, it can kind of ebb and flow. It's been my experience. What have you gone through there?
Well, I'm much more savvy today about who I accept as clients.
Yeah.
I did a quick survey about 10 years ago of the people who I'd either fired as clients or who had fired me. And they were high on self-confidence and low on listening. And I'd say at least half, if not 2/3 of the unsuccessful founders are extremely narcissistic. And they think they're right. They're not willing. They go through the motions of listening, but they'll ask, I'll ask them, well, why do you think this thing failed? Or why do you think this challenge was there? They'll say, well, this person didn't know what they were supposed to do and this person didn't. They start blaming circumstances and blaming external things rather than looking at themselves and how can I be better? How can I grow? So that self-centeredness, responding defensively to feedback, never looking at your own role in a project that failed or an initiative that didn't work out. Always trying to blame circumstances or other people.
Yeah.
And so I say no to those people, and I tell them why.
How do you describe why?
I say, to be successful, you're going to have to figure out how you need to change. And nothing you're saying to me tells me that you think you're part of the problem. Right? It may be that only a certain element of your overall style needs to change, but a lot of times you're not hearing what's frustrating people. You're not recognizing how you're damaging the company. You've created a reality distortion field where people are saying, yes, boss, you're right, boss, because they're afraid to push back and tell you that they think you're wrong or that they're afraid to disagree with you.
My premise is all of that is driven by fear and insecurity.
Absolutely. But a lot of them are so deeply insecure that they don't even recognize that.
And it goes back to those walls, because those walls, the four walls, are all an establishment of that insecurity, which then are barriers from doing what you described that needs to be done. And so I look at this as like, hey, Rich, you tell them no and just say, hey, I got a guy that can help you fix that.
Right.
I don't know if I can, but it's like I've had to walk through that. And you've recognized that, but yet I think this comes back to, and this is a leadership thing, right? Hey, I know that I can help people go through that problem because I've had to go through it and I've helped others grow through it and can share that vulnerability. And yet, man, I think there's so much in a leader where why some of that narcissistic, cover to insecurity gets shown up is, as a founder, I got to be everything, because if I'm not everything, there's no longer a place for me here.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of this comes down to self-awareness.
Absolutely.
And self-awareness is external in the sense you have to recognize how people are seeing you and taking you and responding to you.
Yeah.
But internal awareness is you've got to be aware of what are your natural tendencies. What's autopilot? What when you get angry, what's your body telling you? Is there fear that was there first that you ignored? And because the only thing you've learned is anger, the only emotion that you feel comfortable with is anger, and underneath that is fear hiding. Yeah. Self-awareness is maybe in a meeting becoming aware that you're talking more than everybody else, or that you're talking louder than everybody else, or that something somebody said is making you feel defensive, and you recognize that. And you recognize that in your body. You feel that in your body. A couple of weeks ago, a very, very bright woman entrepreneur met with me, wanted to know about my coaching. And I have never been interrogated. It was like Gestapo interrogation style, like this. And every time I would try to probe and ask a question about her, she would turn it around And I paid attention to my body, and I thought, I'm feeling attacked.
Yeah.
And so I gave her gently some of that feedback. Changed
Yeah.
her tone a little bit, but then she came right back at it. and I said, I think I've had enough. I'm not feeling like we're making a connection because I'm feeling like you're interrogating me.
Yeah.
And your aggressiveness is probably something that is in the way for your leadership, and I don't think you see it.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, if you feel like that and she's trying to, get you to work with her, and you're like, how do you think everyone that works with her feels?
Yeah, exactly. And she was very, very smart. She was
course.
very, very young, but very, very smart. And she thought she was right. And she had some ideas about the way you manage.
Yeah.
That it's like a century of research would tell you that that's not the case. But she thought she was smarter, right?
Well, but I would surmise that's what she's done to survive and have success, as you've, kind of laid out. And like, what you hear won't get you there. You may have been able to plow through the crowd and be at the top of the heap, but all of a sudden the rest of them want nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are you doing now?
Yeah. I'll give you another story about narcissism and self-awareness. I asked this person because he was alienating a lot of people and was really putting up a wall. I said, what do you look for in a good friend? And without hesitation, he said, I look for someone who can help me achieve my goals. Like, whoa. And I said, well, let me describe what that says to me. And he wasn't listening to that at all.
Like, when you say he wasn't listening, how do you respond?
He got defensive and said it wasn't true and that it was justified.
Oh,
because
okay.
He had very ambitious goals and he didn't have a lot of time for this and that.
Sure.
Right. I'm sure after the company failed, which it did, he had a lot of time for a while.
Which I mean, this is what I'm hopeful. Like you mentioned the CEO earlier. And, I recognize this. I don't know if I told you about it. It's just, we can have window shattering moments, and as you describe, I see one thing through the mirror. What you see through, in our sitting here is through the window. And if that window shatters, all of it falls apart, the company fails, man, I have to address that.
Yeah.
Now there's two ways to address it. And I think you've probably seen both. It was everyone else's fault. It was the market conditions fault. It was my investors' fault. It was my board's fault. I'll go restart because it was just their problem. I won't change anything. I'll go do it different, as opposed to, and lose total confidence.
Yeah. Yes.
Both of them are destructive because if you, and I've seen this, like, if I go to the point where it's like, man, the window shatters and I'm lost, or I even extend that, a mirror shattering moment, man, it takes a lot of fortitude to grow out of it.
Yeah.
And I say grow out of it because it's I have to almost reestablish what am I good at so I can even get up on level playing field, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. 90% of all startups ultimately fail. 50% fail in the first 2 years. Of those that are funded by venture capital, and they're pretty well vetted because the venture capitalists do a reasonably good job, still 3/4 of them fail. Only 25% of them ever get an exit. And the research also shows that people who are multiple time founders have a slightly better hit rate.
Yeah.
But it's still not what it could be, because I think some of them, exactly what you're saying, haven't learned from that initial failure. The other ones have. I just finished coaching a guy for about 5 years whose first business, first startup was an abysmal failure. And he took it very, very hard. But he figured out what to do differently the second time. And when I looked at his personality test, and we use machine learning, we can actually predict from 50 elements of personality, we can predict the 360. So we can tell you what your autopilot is. When I first looked at his personality test, I thought, oh my God, this guy is going to fail for all these reasons. And I got to know him, and I realized he had learned those lessons. He knew what autopilot was. He was answering the test honestly about what his autopilot was, but he had figured out workarounds on some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people have an exit, a good exit, or some sort of an exit, so that they don't need to work again. And a lot of them will call me and say, well, what should I do? Should I start another company? And I say, take a year or so off, reflect on this. Think about who you are now, because who you are now may be different than who you were when you started this thing. And what was important to you then and what success meant to you then may be different than what success means to you now. So,
that kind of inputs
ahead.
a bit of adaptability.
It does. Yeah, you're right. Again, adaptability comes back to adaptability. But I think it takes an event like that. Let's say you were modestly successful.
Yeah.
Rather than running into, people may know you as an expert in your field, and so that right away, when they hear you're out or have sold a company, they may come to you and say, "Oh, could you help us with this?" It happened to me.
Yeah.
I exited a company, and people came to me going, "Could you help us?" I think there's danger in that.
Yeah.
Because there's a guy named William Bridges who wrote a book about 30 years ago, maybe, called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. Transitions. And he talks about transitions as having 3 phases. Endings, which is saying goodbye, letting go. The neutral zone, which is chaos, a self-reflection and looking at what went wrong and what's important to me now. And then there are new beginnings, which is getting started and not carrying old baggage and doing it right. And what happens is when people, and Bridges talks about this, what happens when people rush through or don't even spend any time in the neutral zone reflecting.
Yes.
They contaminate the new beginning. And so a number of founders who've come to me after spending a couple of years in the neutral zone said, "Thank you very much for convincing me that I needed to take some time off to do this, because what I've done now is dramatically different, and I would never have gotten to that, and I would have just gone back into another situation that was similar to the one that I came out of."
Here's what I pull from that is some people are forced to those, transitions, right? I get fired, I sell my company, but every single person can build that into their personal growth, whether it's personal, company, and it's one of the things that I hear so often from people, and it goes back to, the comment about growth. Do you have the capacity, or are you motivated to growth? And oftentimes I think as we're talking about this, building adaptability, being vulnerable, having the awareness, it is in too many of our organizations, we don't allow from the owner all the way through bottom level starting person the opportunity to get into that neutral zone and think.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Here's what's really interesting. There's a scale called self-reflectiveness. That was one of the things we measure. And there's an adjective that gets predicted by looking at all the answers to all the questions and predict what adjectives could be used to describe this person. It's sort of like a meta view.
Okay.
The adjective reflectiveness is one of the biggest differentiators between successful and unsuccessful. And it's like when you get divorced. If you run right into a new relationship, you probably didn't figure out what you did wrong in the first one because you were just blaming the other person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
from that comment there, people will say reflectiveness, right? You're talking about reflectiveness. There's two different types. As we're discussing, there's two types, and kind of like I take personal ownership or I reflect and blame. Right? So I can reflect and say, man, it was her fault. Man, you know what? It was my investors or whatever. And like I can think about it. It's like, all right, how do I not do that again? External. Right. But it takes both the external and the internal. All right, what situations do I need to be aware of? How did that then drive my actions?
Yeah, exactly. I think I've meditated for almost 60 years, twice a day. And what that gives me is a half a step of silence back from what's going on. So I get a perspective on my behavior. I reflect more these days before I act.
Yeah.
There's a little space, there's a gap between the stimulus situation that came in and whacked me and my response. It took a lot of years for that gap and that silence to get deep
I'm a
enough.
slow learner too. It's okay, Rich. I'm a slow learner.
To get deep enough.
Yeah.
Be able to stop some of the reactive behavior. Another way of describing the unsuccessful founders is they're reactive. They're reactive. They're emotionally reactive. They yell and they scream and they get stressed because they're reactive, and they create a reactive organization that does nothing but firefight.
You could probably almost do an assessment based upon the speed of reactiveness that probably tells a lot.
Yeah, I think that's true. We got the physiological measures and the measures of the brain these days that would tell us. Yeah, I think that's true. The emotional reactivity of a leader clouds their judgment. Mm-hmm. And I think there are so many decisions that come at you as a leader that your judgment of any given decision could kill the company down the line. Or maybe there are a series of small decisions you make that ultimately kill the company. Mm-hmm. So your judgment is better when your mind is cool, when you're not being threatened or angry or depressed or whatever.
I've heard it often said, if your emotional temperature is on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're at a 10, you're in trouble. Everyone's in trouble.
Blind.
I mean, you're just, yes. And yet you can't be so devoid at a 1 because then you're just a wet noodle, right? And it takes that mid-level.
No,
right?
No.
Okay.
No. Emotional reactivity is one piece of it. A 1 would be you're so grounded that you see what's going in and you listen to what's going on in yourself and you see what's going on out there. You're recognizing the laws of nature that are unfolding in front of you. It's more that silent detachment, not emotional detachment. It's that that objectivity that comes from being comfortable with yourself so that you can see what's there. Not emotionally numb. It's not emotional numbness.
Right? Which in my opinion, only comes from that process of reflecting, like you said, and addressing those emotions and how those fears and insecurities coming back to those in, the external stimuli that drives the internal stimuli. I have to come to grips with that in order to, to ratchet the scale, like you just said.
You got it exactly. I'll tell you, this is a very interesting thing that happened about it's been 20 years ago now, because it was once Accenture bought my company. I had to work for them for 3 miserable years. It's this giant beast of a company. It's it's over it's like 750,000 employees now worldwide. And at that time, I don't know whether they do it now, you'd get threatening emails in the middle of the night telling you you're out of compliance because you didn't take this class or you didn't file this report. And I was meditating in the other room here. And at that time, I couldn't turn off the ding in my computer. And I was in a very deep, silent meditation, very blissful, very silent. And I heard a ding. It was about 5 a.m. and I heard a ding. And I watched my mind go from silence to a fear thought came out. It was like there was this web of fear, like there had been a spider that extruded this web of fear. And then the fear morphed into anger. And then all of a sudden I realized, I'm watching my fear and my response. I must not be my response. Mm-hmm. I'm the watcher of response. I'm the watching presence. And that response isn't me. That's something that I reacted to. And it was like the spider pulled the web all back in, and there I sat back in silence. So it was like it gave me a real life example of how emotion could get triggered, how it created this web of obsessing, worry, anger that swept me away, and I was feeling the adrenaline. And then I noticed it because there was enough of that presence there.
Yeah.
And it was like,
I think
can't do that all the time.
Well, what I think is interesting is it was very much a Pavlovian, to use that example, response to the ding. You recognize, what happened. And yet, as you and I both know, it took you a lot of experience to be able to have that state. And yet every single day, leaders and founders and people are getting that stimuli without any comprehension of the response. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they go right into that spider web and it's a mess.
We call a startup a killing field because there's stress and decision-making and crises coming at you every day, again and again and again and again. So one of the things that differentiated the successful from the unsuccessful was they got higher ratings on resilience and stress management. The successful ones did. The unsuccessful ones got overwhelmed by it and became reactive, or maybe were more reactive initially.
I just had a conversation with a gentleman, Sebastian Page is his name. And he wrote a book called The Psychology of Leadership. And one of the essence he talks about in that is our response to stress and how we lead. And one of the things we got in the conversation about, kind of what you just said, is in order to build resilience, I don't need to throw you into a pit full of spiders when you're, arachnophobic. That doesn't help you. But yet, if it's, one small, what stress level can you embrace? What stress level, and making sure, we can experience that over time. That's what builds resilience, not I'm going to shove them in the deep end and they'll figure out how to swim. They drown.
It's a bit of a chicken or an egg thing. If you've already got some silence, then you'll learn how to deal with the things that come your way more effectively, and you'll be able to handle increasingly intense situations more effectively. My master's thesis was on meditation in 1973. My doctoral dissertation was on stressful life events, in 1978. Because I could see they were two sides of the same coin. right? There was one study that was done, and this is a very old study, where they hooked up meditators and non-meditators to a galvanic skin response, which measured basically the sweating on your hands, and it's a primitive measure of stress. And they were all sitting in the same place, and they rang alarm bells, like fire alarms, and all of them reacted pretty much the same the first time, but the unsuccessful, the non-meditators kept responding almost at the same level every time. The meditators slowly started to decrease in their response as their nervous system was strengthened and it got used to it. Man, so that's what I see. That people ask me, should I do a startup? And I say, well, how do you handle stress? Yeah. Or how important is work-life balance to you? And if they say anything like, well, I can deal with it. No, I'm 24. I don't have to have balance for a while. And that's because it's going to test you.
Oh, yeah.
But big company, I mean, the average tenure for a Fortune 500 CEO is like 2.5 years now. Talk about the insecurity. I mean, quarterly earnings pressures, totally. AI, increasing speed of change is making it very hard to sustain success of a big company without getting thrown off the bus.
Which to me is so detrimental, not to the direction of the company. Well, it'll go wherever, but the impact that it has on everyone else, because as we just talked about, we don't build resilience without longevity.
Yeah.
And so the ability to find best practices for, we talked about this. All right, I'm at one company, then I take time to reflect. If you're not at an organization long enough to let the dust settle to start figuring out, all right, what's really going on here, your reflection time isn't going to be it'll be valuable to an extent, but not as valuable.
Yes. I talked to this wonderful conclusion. I talked to a CEO who had done a bunch of turnarounds long time ago. And he had been called up by a very well-known company in the East who wanted him to come in and turn this company around. And he said, I'll only do it if you give me 3 months to figure out what's going on and not put any pressure on me during those first 3 months. And the board said, well, why would we do that? He says, because I know 2 or 3 of the people who you brought in to turn it around before, and they were smart people and they were experienced. So something was going on that was subtle. And I want to be able to talk to every store manager and every warehouse manager and before, so I really get a sense of what's going on, because I don't think you guys have figured it out yet. It's like United Airlines is still screwed up after 40 years, right? What's going on?
Well, I mean, it's to this point. I mean, as we're talking about, if you're constantly changing, then you have no idea what is actually, I don't want to use the word what's staying the same, but it's kind of there's so much
secret sauce. What's the secret sauce and what's going wrong?
Yeah, or this makes sense. It's good, but it's underutilized, or it's good, but it's in the wrong spot, or however it may be. It's like you're just, the decision-making ability is hampered so much, going back to when the pressure is, you got to make a decision. You got to make a decision.
Yeah, you got to get the quarterly earnings. What's really interesting is I see a lot of companies fail when they're in fast growth, because overnight you're hiring 70% more employees than you've had. Yep. You've got more customers. You've just decided to acquire 3 companies. They came with legacy problems and engineering organizations. You haven't integrated them in. Your old system for doing X, Y, or Z is now outmoded. And all of a sudden, the cost of a mistake gets to be greater.
Yeah.
And the mistakes are more complicated now.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's I was watching a show and it was talked about, a gambler, right? You're playing on the roulette table, craps, whatever. It's like the people that win are the ones that can stand to lose.
Yeah. And learn.
And, I'm not a gambler, but it's kind of that same idea. It's like in a company, you're going to lose. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to go wrong. Can you withstand it? Do you have the structure? Do you have the tenure? Do you have the resilience to embrace it, to reflect and learn? Do you have the board that's saying, hey, you made a mistake. Great. Awesome. Now we know what not to do. Now let's go figure out how to, move forward. If you don't have that temperament, man, your ability to deal with the walls or, to really focus on, the ability to be a visionary and have relationships and execution, that's out the window.
Yeah.
It's not even, you're not having that question.
It's true, but unfortunately, boards of directors are made up often by people who are investors only, who have never had any operating experience, and all they do is look at the numbers, and they have a very short-term mentality because they're looking, if it's venture, they're looking to get in and out in less than 10 years. If it's private equity, they're thinking about flipping it in 2 or 3. So it makes you very short term and makes them very short term. So it makes it harder for you to do what's strategically good for the company because the pressure is on you to get quick returns from the board of directors and the investors.
It takes a lot of internal fortitude, whether it's by selecting a role or by, to direction to choose to be a crock pot or an oven or a slow cooker or a roaster rather than a microwave.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
A very unfortunate statistic that I saw, I don't remember where it came from, was that the job satisfaction level of early stage startup CEOs was higher than the job satisfaction level of big company CEOs for this very reason. Right?
100%. Because at one, you're expected to fail. The other one, your tolerance for failure is non-existent.
Yeah, well, you're in the excitement early, the excitement of growing something. You haven't hit the traction stage and the fast growth where all the problems start to emerge, right? So in the big companies, it's like you got this big beast. It's like, imagine turning around a company as big as Accenture, That's like turning around the biggest cruise ship in the world.
It takes a long time. Because you can have the vision, but it also takes in order for that vision to come, you have to have the relationship, and only with those then can you possibly execute. Because you can't, as you told us earlier, is you can have one of the three, okay, but unless they're working in tandem, whether it's through you, your organization, whatever, it's not going to work out.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. It's true. Rich, where can people learn more about you, your book, all the things you're doing?
Well, you can buy the book called Founders Keepers, and we talk about what makes a founder, what differentiates successful from unsuccessful, and then what are the things founders need to do to grow based on their colleagues rating them on their performance, but also rating how important that was. So we looked at the 10 things where there was the biggest gap between importance and performance. That's the first place. My website, Hagberg Consulting Group, Inc., HagbergConsultingGroup.com. Those would be the places they could go.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for everyone watching on YouTube. If you could hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to get notified whenever we drop new content, that would be spectacular. As well, if you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever that may be, if you can rate and review this episode, it will help more people find impactful leaders like Rich. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.